screen now. Hello. Good morning, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Robin Grandpruth, the Wyoming Department of Education. I am the Level Up coordinator, and the Level Up is made up of district teachers of the year, principals, presidential award winners in math and science teaching, Milken Award winners, and other education award winners. And they're here with us today
So some of the best and the brightest of our teachers.
from across the whole state, sir.
Welcome. Who all is with that group? Okay.
Just a few of them here today.
We appreciate and take the empty seats and, if necessary, swipe a couple of these chairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're happy to be here.
Okay.
Don't be shy. Get a chair.
Okay, that explains them all. Now, just for my own purposes in running the meeting, how many people are going to want to testify on Senate File 130? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I wasn't sure what we were dealing with there. Meeting will come to order. Can you see if you can get this microphone to turn on? This one, that's the one that's on. Okay. First bill for our consideration will be Senate File 130, Educational Freedom Act. Senator Hutchings, I saw her. There you are. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate a chance to come before you to speak about this bill that I think is very important. But we noticed yesterday that there were some things that we needed to change. So hopefully the staff has provided you with some amendments that I think we need to actually go over first to kind of bring some clarity to the bill. And then we can discuss the why, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman. And hopefully you can follow along nicely with me. And I have Mr. Dickie Shaner here. I guess I don't know your title. You can tell him your title.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Dickie Shaner, Chief of Staff, Department of Ed, speaking on behalf of the superintendent today.
Okay.
Just so you know, I had the pleasure of speaking to the superintendent yesterday about the proposed piece of legislation, and she kindly took the bill, went over it with her staff, and that's where we noticed some of the some errors that we want to correct. So would you like me, Mr. Chairman, to go over those right now?
Okay.
Okay, what we saw on page 1, line 8, section 1, the Wyoming Statute 219102, we would like to change that, and you'll see that on the proposed amendment, line 1, we have line 1 and 2, 213110. She thought that was the most appropriate place to put this change or this piece of legislation to make it so that it would flow through all of education, not just stay within the statute we had it in, which dealt mainly with teaching the Constitution. I think because we had so many constitutional references, the LSO staff kind of thought that was the place we wanted to put it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we would also like to delete lines 9 through 15. You'll see that on line 4 of the amendment, delete entirely on page 1. And then on page 2, lines 1 through 10, we're gonna delete because those belong in 219102, so we won't need that. Are there any questions?
Okay, so you're disagreeing with the
Sure.
LSO on the placement of the bill within the statute and not affecting the substance of what you're doing. Is that a correct understanding?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just give more of a conceptual piece to the amendments and what the superintendent was aspiring to with talking with the sponsor. This first part of the bill where it has these principles, the superintendent supports these principles and thinks it's important to have them in statute. However, her thought was that those principles should be a responsibility of the Board of Trustees. And so instead of putting it in this section related to the instruction on the state and federal constitutions, that it should actually go in the section of statute around local Board of Trustees responsibilities, which is 21.3.110. And so that would mean that page 1, 2, and 3 essentially just get moved
Right.
to the local Board of Trustees responsibility. And then her other suggestion was that the rest, so page 4,
Hold on.
oh, okay. Wait on
Because
that.
we need to get, help them understand what we're doing here as well. So
Okay.
we'll get to page 4 in a minute. Okay, he's moving a little faster than I think the amendment was taking us. So we're gonna just go back to the amendment again, and hopefully you followed up to line 4. Is that correct? Were you deleted on page 2, 1 through 10?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've caught these first deletions.
Okay, and then on page 2, lines 12 through 14, we're gonna delete that entirely and insert what you see on the amendment, lines 10. So does that make sense for you all? And instead of it being B, we're gonna make it C. You'll
Okay.
see that on lines 12.
So it's clearly a responsibility of the school district board to see that the instruction is done this way.
Correct.
Okay,
Now we're
Let
gonna go
me-
to page 4.
yeah.
If you wanna jump in?
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Chairman, it's the opinion of the superintendent that page 4, all the way to line 3 of page 5 should just be deleted. And that's because it just adds a layer of complexity and ambiguity that actually dilutes from the principles stated previously. And so I'm not sure exactly, because I haven't had a chance to crosswalk this amendment, but it looks like it gets close to accomplishing that. But I just wanted to share with what the superintendent thinks, that all of page 4 and then 1 through 3 on page 5 should just be deleted.
And what happened in the amendment, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, is when they were drafting the quick amendment for you, they did not put that in. So that's going to be something I'm going to propose as we go through the bill, is to delete page 4 in its entirety. And then we'll get the numbers, and the LSO will get everything drafted perfectly. And with that, Mr. Chairman, we're
Let
gonna,
me stop you right there.
please.
Committee, do you understand what the sponsor and the State Department of Education are proposing to do?
Good.
Anybody have any questions on that? Senator Brightman. That's in their
Sorry.
office.
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the original title, or Title 21, Chapter 9, 101 and 102. 101A says the Board of Trustees of each school district within the state shall cause the schools under its jurisdiction to provide an educational program. So it looks like it could go in either one.
Yeah.
And it looks like what we're doing with this amendment is completely just punting and putting it in the school districts. Could you elaborate a little bit more on why the move was necessary? Because it looks like it fits in both.
Do you want to go ahead and just, because I could.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Beitman. The thought was that if you look at the current draft on page 2, line 12, instruction on the topics enumerated in this section and any supporting materials shall be consistent with the following principles of individual freedom. The superintendent's thought was that these principles of individual freedom should apply to everything and not just be limited to this section. And that's why the thought was move those principles to the duty of the Board of Trustees to ensure that all business conducted by the school district is aligned to these enumerated principles, not just that section.
Senator Office, did you have?
I did, just for clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 4, it was the entirety of page 4, including Romanet 7, that was proposed to be deleted.
Romanet 7 on page 4, 7, yes,
Okay, thank you.
yes.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, I apologize that after the draft of the bill, I think I was so engrossed in the portions that we wanted to add, I didn't catch that we had actually put it in a spot that would limit what we were trying to do instead of expand the scope. So again, apologize for that.
Me, I've got my reservations about this amendment.
The whole amendment or just that page 4? Because I know you liked page 4.
Yeah. The whole of it. And looking at it, page 4, really, you don't delete that provision at the top of page 4, as I understand it.
Yeah, not in the amendment. That was the proposal. I think that is the confusion. The amendment that we have does not align with the amendment that was proposed perfectly. And that was why I was asking for clarification as well of what the proposal was.
So,
Okay, we'll take that under advisement for now as to whether we're going to go with it or stick with the LSO's judgment as to where it belongs. I think it works either way. So proceed with an explanation of the substance of the bill.
got you, Mr. Chairman. And you can only imagine when I got home last night and I was told about what was going on, and we tried to fix it as quickly as we could. And I couldn't get in touch with you to let you know what we were going to be doing today. So I'm really, really sorry. One of the saddest things, Mr. Chairman, I see going on, there's a faction in our nation that is spreading what Governor Youngkin in Virginia states, information that is inherently divisive, and I also believe destructive to young people today of whatever ethnicity. And it's mainly affecting our Black community, where we're being told that our lives don't matter. Our history is just full of hatred, and I get that. I know that. Our history is not the best history, but we've come a long way. We've got 4 centuries of our founding and hundreds of years of our actually becoming a nation, America, of trying to rectify some of the ills of the past. And with the factions coming up, young people are feeling that they are not appreciated, that they're substandard, and that's why, briefly, I think this bill is necessary, that we get it put in our statutes, that people that come here to Wyoming, especially in the military, can see that we have done our best to rectify some of the things of the past, and that we're going to follow our Wyoming Constitution and follow it and obey it. So, Mr. Chairman, I could go on, but I think that's the basis of what we have here. I don't know if you want me to go through the bill right now really quickly, but I don't want to belabor the point. I think we all know what we're talking about, and I'd like to move on as quickly as possible.
Okay. If you could briefly take us through the heart of the bill on
Right.
page 2 and 3, and maybe the very top of page 4 that isn't changed by the amendment.
Correct. So what we're trying to establish here in our statutes and with the Department of Education is that all members of the human race are equal. This is page 2, line 16. And that's a provision in our Wyoming Constitution, Article 1, Section 2. It also states that all citizens are politically equal, as the laws of the state affecting the political rights and privileges of citizens shall be without distinction of race, color, sex, or any circumstance or condition other than individual incompetency or unworthiness duly asserted by a court of competent jurisdiction as provided in Wyoming Constitution 1, Section 3. That's the top of page 3. And no ethnicity is inherently superior to another. And that seems to be one of the things the factions are pushing, is that one group is above the other. So we'd like to see that in statute, and that's in Wyoming Constitution, the Wyoming Constitution, Article 7, Section 12. And we move on, that no person shall be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly on the basis of ethnicity, color, national origin, religion, disability, or sex. Then we go on to talk about mediocrity or traits, including solid work ethics, are not racist, but fundamental to the right to pursue happiness and be rewarded for industriousness. No person, by virtue of his ethnicity or sex, bears responsibility or for actions committed in the past, which is so important, by other members of the same ethnicity or sex. And here's where, Mr. Chairman, on page 4 is where maybe Mr. Shaner can explain why the superintendent thought we should remove page 4, sections 7, and they've been renumbered 7, 8, and 9 on the amendment. Maybe you can explain that to him if you would like him to, Mr. Chairman.
Well, as I read the amendment, it does not propose removing page 4, lines 1 through 12.
It
right?
doesn't, Mr. Chairman, but what we'd like to do is have him explain to you why the superintendent and the education department would like to remove that section.
I don't understand. I don't see it being removed in the amendment. Maybe,
When LSO drafted the quick draft for us this morning, Mr. Chairman, they decided not to remove that part and leave it up to you and the committee to make that choice, whether you want to remove it or leave it in.
Okay.
And what I'm proposing is to allow Mr. Shaner an opportunity to explain to you
well,
why.
okay, that's, Mr. Shaner, can you help us out here?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's the opinion of the superintendent, and as the senator stated, that amendment does not fully reflect the superintendent's opinion on an amendment. Her opinion is that page 4 in its entirety and page 5, lines 1, 2, and 3 should be deleted. And the reason is that the principles that the senator just went over are fundamental to our society. They're easy to understand. And if a local board of trustees is charged with making sure that professional development and classroom instruction and materials being in those schools aligns to those principles, that's something that we think can be accomplished. When we get to page 4, we start getting into a much more ambiguous and sort of convoluted requirements in statute, and it becomes very difficult for, say, a teacher to understand whether or not something, quote, may adversely reflect upon a person based on that lesson. And so it just becomes, I think, much more difficult to sort of implement, monitor, et cetera, and and then I think it takes away from those enumerated principles that are much more clear and easy to understand. So that's the reason for the deletion of this page. Or suggested deletion.
Okay. Any questions for either the department or the sponsor? Senator Biden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shaner, if we were to delete page 4 and the top of page 5, it looks to me like that would be in there to prohibit the insertion of this 1619 project type stuff. If that were to go away, what would prohibit the local school from embracing and teaching the 1619 project principles?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Beitman. It's our belief that if the principles enumerated on pages 2 and 3, if the local school board is held to those principles, that a curriculum that would violate those principles would not be allowed. So I think you would be covered with those principles.
Mr. Chair, I do want to disagree here on one point, and again, I apologize. If you look at page 4, lines 20 through 23, onto the top of page 5, we want to keep those. That's an error. We want to keep those. So does that help clarify for you, Senator Beitman? We want that. So pages 4, 1 through 18, we want to delete. I think that's the correct.
And Mr. Chairman, I don't see any issue with keeping that one.
Yeah, the point, as I read it, of item 7 was that you can use all the materials, but you need to point out the difference between those and the standards. And you think, the department thinks that would complicate things unduly.
Mr. Chairman, we do.
Okay. Now, who else had questions here? Okay, anything else under Hutchins before we, Senator Steinmetz, you got to get my attention.
That's all right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is just because I'm having pause removing all of section 4, or on page 4 as well. And I mean, if we left that part in, would it harm anything? Because I really like this bill, and I think one thing that I've learned in my tenure here is the more clear that we can be, the better off we are. And even the Supreme Court justices have told us that. And I think that this really clarifies, in my mind, what we're trying to do, what the legislative intent is. And so I just wonder, could you answer that for me as to what about this muddies the water for the superintendent, and how it is inconsistent maybe with legislative intent being clarified for the districts of what we're asking them to do?
Senator Steinmetz, just want to make clear, you're talking about section 7 on the top of page 4.
Mr. Chairman, yes, all of page 4 and 5, the rest of that you're proposing for deletion.
Just so you know, we're only talking about sections 7 on the original bill and that little portion that says C right now. Those are the only portions, lines 1 through 18, that we're talking about removing. And I'll let Mr. Shaner explain with the department.
Yeah, thank you, Senator, Mr. Chairman. Senator Steinmetz, good question. And just to be clear, I do think that subsection D at the bottom, as the senator said, that I think that's fine. That's consistent with holding the district responsible. When you get to section Romanet 7 and section C, and we're talking about not implementing programs or policies that adversely reflect upon a person, I struggle with understanding what that would mean in terms of teaching a lesson and whether it adversely reflects upon a person. So I think that's a challenge. And then I think section 7 is pretty complicated in terms of how exactly practically you follow that with your lessons every day.
Okay, Senator Hutchins, anything more before we go to the audience for comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I see where you guys are having some difficulty with page 4, and I am totally fine with you leaving it in there. I'm totally fine with you amending lines 1 through 18 in any way you see fit. I see the importance of all of it. I can see the vagueness at times as well. I think this piece of legislation is so important that I want you to be able to do what you think is best to bring it out of committee and onto the floor. So I'm in agreement with whatever you want to do to make it better, and with hopes that the department will agree that we're doing the best thing we can for our students. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, further questions from the sponsor of the department? Okay. Public testimony, who wants to be first? WEA.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. There's a lot going on here, so I'm going to try and keep this succinct. I do have a couple of questions. First and foremost, I do agree with these principles that are laid out in here. And in fact, I think there's a good discussion about the supremacy clause, right? These are principles that we lay out within our state constitution and within our U.S. Constitution. So I question the need for it. I understand them, I agree with them, but question the need to enumerate these within statute. The removal of page 4, all of page 4, section 7 is into page 5. We support that proposed amendment. And one of the questions I did have, and I wanted a point of clarity, are we removing on page 1 from line 14 all the way to line 10 on page 2? Is that one of the proposed amendments? And maybe that's a question for the bringer of the bill.
Yes. Senator Rothfuss.
That's accurate. It is then replaced with language as specified in a proposed amendment, which would insert 21.3.110 duties of boards of trustees, and then a C paragraph, the Board of Trustees in each school district shall adopt and enforce policies for instruction regarding the topics specified in this subsection in accordance with the following, and then conform.
Chairman Scott, Senator Rothfuss, appreciate the clarification. So I'm going to reiterate some of the points that we had discussed before. Again, there seems to be an attempt to circumvent our standard setting process. You know, again, these are things that are delineated within our state constitution, within our Wyoming constitution. But when we start trying to delegate and determine standards and instruction at the legislative level, instead of using our standard setting process with the State Board of Education, an inclusive process that utilizes input from parents, educators, and citizens within communities. That input is vital. The process that the State Board of Education uses for those standard setting processes has worked for our students and should continue to work. The other piece here, I'm glad that we're eliminating the testing component because, again, as you had heard during the interim, one of the most important factors contributing to teacher burnout and fatigue were the amount of tests that they were having to administer. So we're happy to see that that piece is being removed. I do want to touch on one of the other pieces that we had discussed during the interim when it came to our teacher satisfaction, attraction, and retention, and that was respect for the profession. And that's all the way from our classroom educators through the administration, through the State Board of Education and their standard setting process. These folks are professionals. They understand what is taught in our classrooms, why it is taught in our classrooms. That has been a big area of contention. They feel like they need support. And when the legislature circumvents a process that has worked for our students and has worked for educators, it's problematic in terms of demonstrating that support. We are on and against this bill, and I'll stand for any questions at this point.
Questions? Let me ask you now, I didn't say anything about testing in here. Did I miss it? Where are you talking?
Mr. Chairman Scott, so with the removal of page 1, lines 14 through 10, there is a testing component within. So on lines 5, actually, let's see here. So starting at line 4, no student shall receive a high school diploma, associate degree, or baccalaureate degree without satisfactorily passing an examination on the principles of the Constitution of the United States and the state of Wyoming. What that looks like to us is an additional testing requirement. Now, that being said, my understanding was that that had been removed, and we support that.
Okay. Let me just clarify what's going on here in the bill. That's existing language. We aren't changing it. If we take it out of the bill, you've still got it. It's been there ever since I can remember. There's nothing new there. That's reprinted here because it's the lead-in and you have to make sense out of the changes that are the underlying laws. So that is not a new testing requirement. That has been there for 40, 50, I don't know how many years. So that's nothing new. That's a misreading of the drafting principles here.
Mr. Chairman Scott, I appreciate the clarity. Thank you.
Any further questions? Teachers Union? Senator Brightman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, you said you're against the bill, but the bill just basically restates that, we're not going to teach kids that America's fundamentally racist and systemically racist and all the, prevent the tenets of the 1619 Project from creeping into the classroom. I would say that's something that overwhelming majority of Wyoming parents would want to see happen in our schools and to restate our fundamental principles that Senator Hutchings stated earlier. I don't see why you'd be opposed to that. And it's not that we're undermining teachers in any way. We're just specifically directing the school districts to kind of keep certain things out of the curriculum and out of the classroom. Can you elaborate a little bit more as to your opposition, please?
Chairman Scott, Senator Brightman, happy to elaborate. What we are opposed to is, again, circumventing a process that has worked for our students, a process that does include those parent and teacher voices. Those parent and teacher voices in the state of Wyoming are diverse. To some of the topics that we had touched on last week, there is not a singular point of view in the state of Wyoming. We are a diverse state, and we should be happy that we are a diverse state with varying opinions. So we need to include that input in that process and in those standard setting processes. That is where the rub is for us, is that we have very limited input on this. We're not opposed to the principles. I absolutely agree with the principles that are laid out in this, but we are opposed to attempts to circumvent a process that has worked for our students, is collaborative, and utilizes all parent engagement in that process.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In a read of the statutes under instruction, there are several components that the legislature has established as components of the educational system. Are you opposed to that as well?
Chairman Scott, Senator Steinmetz, I was not here during that tenure. Had I been here, and we appreciate the Native American standards, the intent behind that. But again, if we are going to apply the principles that we're looking at, if we were going to look at that today, my testimony would be the same. Those standards need to be developed by the State Board of Education.
Okay, thank you very much. Who wants to be next? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Chairman Scott and the board, and I wanted to thank you for letting me be here. My name is Susan Lone. I'll pull that closer. I'm with House District 411, and as you probably can tell, I do not have children in the school at this time, but I do have grandkids in the schools. And anything we can do to raise the bar in Wyoming, I think we need to do, for one thing. The other thing is, I just would like to share is that I have a daughter-in-law who's from the Philippines. I've got a daughter-in-law from Moldova. I have a son-in-law who's Mexican, and then I have a redneck, and I have a special needs child. So,
So you're a typical American.
I thought we were, but I have seen things that my grandchildren, being of different ethnicities and colors and things, that they have had a few struggles. And so that's why I just wanted to let you know I am honored for this bill, and I thank you.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you very
All right.
much.
Thank you very much for letting me be here.
Okay, who else wants to testify on this bill? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. Members, my name is Kyle True. I'm from Casper. And I want to encourage adoption of this bill and for it to continue through the process, not pretending that what comes out of committee will be the final bill. I realize there are many other opportunities for change. I actually want to encourage the legislature and thank you for taking steps to be more active in our school system. I see fights bubbling up around the state. And with respect, I don't think our current system is working for our students, nor for our teachers, nor for the communities that they serve. And I think that clarity from the legislature could really help align and quiet some of these battles. I think that that Wyoming, we like to think of ourselves as insulated, and I love to say Wyoming is what America was. But I think that there are rivers running through education today, and we are not the island that I had hoped and thought that we were. I think we're subject to many of the things going on around this country. They're going on in the wrong direction. So I think that that bills like this and your involvement at the legislative level in clarifying for our schools what we need gives the support at other levels. So I do thank you for looking into this and encourage adoption of this bill.
Questions? Thank you very much, sir. Who else? Ryan Farmer, the School Boards Association.
Mr. Chairman, Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. Mr. Chairman, I submit that discussion on the merits of this particular bill are misplaced. The discussion really is about whether or not this is the purview of the legislature or the purview of local school boards. What has been articulated here is what's known as curriculum. You take a component of what is to be instructed and you talk about how that instruction should happen. So this is the very definition of curriculum. And as you know, the Wyoming Constitution prohibits the state from directing the curriculum. The curriculum is the purview of Wyoming school boards. And so, Mr. Chairman, both the selection of instructional materials and the curriculum itself are the purview of local boards. So this is a great discussion for local school boards to have. But Mr. Chairman, I submit that this bill is unconstitutional because it is a limitation of curriculum. And Mr. Chairman, if you're looking for the Green Book, you can take a look at the Wyoming Constitution at Chapter 7, Section 11.
We seem to have not got our Constitution to hand, but there.
I think they're checking across the hall for it.
Okay. Yes, that would be very useful.
Careful, that thing belongs in the Smithsonian.
Yeah. So you're talking about
So, Mr. Chairman, it is,
Section 11, the language is textbooks, neither the legislature nor the superintendent of public instruction shall have power to prescribe textbooks to be used in public, by the public schools.
and Mr. Chairman, when that has been interpreted, that has been interpreted to be curriculum and instructional materials.
That's not what it says. It says textbooks. And when you look at the history of how that got there, it was due to corruption in the 1890s. Textbook publishers were bribing legislatures around the country to prescribe their textbooks, and that was a preventive against that. I think that you're stretching the Constitution a little bit, just looking at the plain language of it. I don't see the prescription of a textbook here.
Mr. Chairman, that has been a long-standing interpretation of that provision.
We do tend to look at the language of the Constitution. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else want to testify on this bill? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lindsay Allen. I'm a teacher in Pioneer, Wyoming, kindergarten through 12th grade every day. I am here to talk to you about a couple things. I don't disagree with the intent of the bill in the sense that I think it's wonderful that we line out that all people in our state are created equal. I do wonder if this is necessary. Does this not exist somewhere else already? Does it need to be written so specifically into the school districts? That being said, if we do feel like it's necessary, I really actually like Section 7 on page 4, because, and I'll give everyone a moment to get there. When I read this bill in its entirety, on the surface level, it does seem to protect everybody, to remind us all that we're created equal. My fear as a teacher is that there seems to be an underlying intent to water down history. And when I read this first paragraph on page 4, it makes me feel like we can still teach history and discuss how our values today don't align with what happened in the past, but I don't have to ignore what happened in the past. We can never learn from the past if we ignore it and water it down. So I fear taking out that first paragraph on page 4. Furthermore, and I know this is not at all the intent of the bill, but I have, even in a small town, I have a lot of students who are homosexual. And I definitely see in multiple places where everyone is protected based on their race, color, and sex and gender,
but not on their sexual orientation. And that is glaringly obvious for the people who that matters to. Those are all my comments. And I stand for questions.
Questions? Let me, not a question, but a comment. I think you've expressed very well the value of that paragraph at the top of page 4. I think it was intended that way, to make sure that you could teach everything.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, public testimony is closed. Committee, we've got some proposed amendments. I think they're two separate ideas. One is changing where in the bill, where in the statutes we place the substance of the bill. And typically that's something, as legislators, we tend to leave to the LSO. They've recommended a particular place here. The State Department has recommended another one. Senator Beitman, you said you thought it worked either way?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I just got this amendment literally 2 minutes before the meeting came to order, and I would like to sleep on this, and maybe we can deal with it in committee of the whole, but I need time to wrap my head around what exactly it is we're doing. So I would prefer to work the bill as originally presented to us, that we were able to read and digest before the committee meeting.
Yeah, I'm going to just go right down the committee. Senator Steinmetz, how do you feel about that?
Mr. Chairman, I would be fine with that if the good sponsor of the bill is all right with that, because I'd like to honor her wishes as well.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's what I would prefer to do too.
Senator Office?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would go along with the sponsor based on it. If the sponsor wants it a certain way, I think it's the sponsor's bill.
Sponsor, we're willing to not do the amendment and think it would work perfectly well the way you brought the bill. If you think the amendment is important and we ought to do it, we're willing to do that.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Senator Beitman. I know it was short notice, even for me last night. I stayed up all night thinking about what we needed to do. And again, I think this is so important that you guys need to understand thoroughly what's going on. So if you need to move forward without the amendment, but know that it's there and what we're proposing to do, and you want to think about it, so when it does come to the committee of the whole, we'll be prepared, I'm all for it.
Okay. With that committee, I think we'll leave that part of the bill the way it is. And I think that's all right with the sponsor, is it not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The amendment that was proposed verbally at the top of page 4, my instinct is to not do that one for the reasons that the last witness explained, which I thought she did very articulate. We're trying to preserve the ability to introduce the students to all the material and just point out how if something's inconsistent, we'll point that out too. Any problem with that? Okay. Do I hear a motion on the bill?
So moved.
Motion is do pass. No amendments? Discussion? Call the roll, please. Oh, Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be a no on the bill, and I think there's a lot that I agree with in the legislation, but once again, it comes down to process, which I think was emphasized very well as to what the role and responsibility of the legislature is with regard to education and what this committee's responsibilities are. Over the last few years, we've definitely moved as strongly as we can into dictating curriculum, dictating educational content, and trying to tell people what they can and can't teach, what books are acceptable, what books aren't, what themes are acceptable. It shouldn't be our role. I know that we can take that role. We're empowered to do a lot of things, whether we should or not. But realistically, the system that was developed, where we have the State Board of Education convene experts, none of us being experts in this topic area, but convene experts and educators and professionals to come together to determine what the standards should be, what should be taught in schools, what is appropriate at each grade level. That's the right process, and it's served our students and our educators well. But we embrace in the political process national talking points, what's on social media, what's in the news, and that tends to guide us, and it polarizes us, and it leads to bills like this, regrettably. It would be nice if we could move away from it and get back to just looking at the policy of what we need in education on behalf of the people of the state of Wyoming. Move away from spending our time on bills like this. But I realize this is the way things probably are going to go. It's regrettable, but again, the idea that we want all of our students to be taught in a way that is compliant with Article 1 of the Wyoming Constitution in particular is exceptional. Of course I want that. But it kind of goes back to Antonin Scalia, late Justice Scalia, and what he said. You know, if there's something I really, really like, it's constitutional. If there's something I really, really don't like, it's probably unconstitutional. And that's kind of how we treat legislation these days. So just because we agree with the content of this bill, and I think everybody generally does, you might all have a few exceptions here and there, but in general, good points in here, doesn't mean it's the right thing for us to do, Mr. Chairman. It isn't. It isn't the appropriate process. We are a political body, and the idea that my children should be taught based on what 51% of the legislature thinks at any given time is not a reasonable approach to educating students. I'll vote no.
Senator Brightman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'll offer the counterpoint to my good friend at the other end of the dais that I heard, Mr. True made a good point about what we have the ability to do here is to quell some of these brush fires that are popping up in our local communities. And like it or not, this controversial issue is not going away. Just like we had a bill in the not too distant past about sexual orientation and gender identity being discussed. Those are issues that are not going away. They need to be addressed. We don't simply just write the checks and go on our way here at the legislature. We set policy as well. That money that we spend a lot of money on education, and we're also held accountable to our constituents to make sure that we're upholding the values that they want us to represent. So people have the ability to elect us and unelect us based on what we do here. Not so much the case when we kick it to the quote experts and the people that write the curriculum, and a lot of the parents don't understand that process. They're not involved in that process, and they have no idea what happens when the experts take care of education. So they look to us and they tell us what they want, and we implement that policy. Policy can change based on elections, and that's what we're here for. But we're simply not here just to cut the checks and leave you all alone. We implement policy here as well, and this is a policy that the people want. So I'm in support of the bill, sir. Thank you.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and in favor of the bill. I believe the parents are the experts, and they're experts that are struggling to be heard sometimes. In my community, this is a hot topic, and we just coming through an election cycle have elected almost an entirely new school board because of some of the issues that have come up through COVID and that have been exposed that are happening in the school systems. And so we have a responsibility to our constituents, to the parents out there, to be their voice. We see organizations that represent school boards and teachers here lobbying that the legislature, well, we're here on behalf of the parents to be their voice, and they're our constituents, and they're the taxpayers funding this education system. And so I think it's completely appropriate that they have a voice in this important issue today.
Your office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the thoughts of my colleagues. One theme that came up in both comments, though, was the idea of school boards. And the reality is we do have 48 elected school boards around the state that are closer to home and do have the authority and requirement that, in fact, they prescribe the curriculum. I realize there's some disagreement on what the Constitution says and how the Wyoming Supreme Court has interpreted over the years. But at the end of the day, they were elected. They're closer to the local voices. And again, the idea that my school board, for example, has to teach the same way as either or any of the senators' local school boards is disappointing, because really my constituency is different from your respective constituencies. If we put statutory requirements in top down, it's the same theme that the federal government uses when they like uniformity, when they tell states, you'll do it this way because this works best, and we have the majority right now. You'll do it our way. We don't like that when they do that to us. When the federal government tells all 50 states, you'll do it the same way, Wyoming tends to be left out. It turns out one size does not fit all. Here's another great circumstance where one size doesn't necessarily fit all. And pretty clearly, my constituency is a different constituency than others around the state. And they would certainly prefer to teach things perhaps a little bit differently. They should be allowed to do that because they were duly elected just as we were, and just as each of our respective boards of education in our districts were. Top down is not always the right answer. But again, we have the power to do it. We give ourselves the power as the legislative branch. But just because we have power doesn't mean we have to implement it all the time. And there's that tendency. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Call for the question.
Question being called for. Call the roll, please.
Senator Beitman. Senator Brennan. Aye. Senator Rothfuss.
No.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Scott.
Aye.
4 ayes, 1 no.
Okay. Bill is passed. The next bill is the study of K-2 education program. Senator Ellis. Lynn, thank you very much for that. Is Senator Ellis here? I don't see her. Okay. We'll wait just a minute, see if we can find the sponsor. This audience, this is a typical difficulty that we do have here. There's all kinds of other things that go on and it sometimes takes a minute. So, Senator Ellis, you've got Senate File 132. Welcome back to Education Committee. Okay.
It's very pretty. It's colorful.
Okay. Okay, morning, you're on.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Senate Education Committee. I bring to you a bill that has to do with content and performance standards, and I'm going to see if I can get LSO to print this or put this up on the screen. Who should I email it to? What- There it is, okay. And so, Mr. Chairman, years ago, before we dive into what the bill has done, we've had lots of conversations about what's in the basket of goods, which is found in 21-9-101B little I. And we have a number of subjects. It's reading, language arts, social studies, math, science, fine arts and performing arts, physical education, health and safety, humanities, career, vocational education, foreign cultures and language, government and civics, including state and federal constitutions, which we talked about yesterday on the Senate floor, and computer science. And you'll recall that computer science was one of the new subjects that we added a few years ago. And when we were having the conversation about whether or not to include computer science, we often heard testimony from people who didn't want that included in the basket, that the plate was full and that the day was too busy, and it simply, we couldn't add anything to the list. So I met at that time with the State Board of Education, the liaison who is no longer with the department, and we had a good conversation, and he made a comment that really kind of stuck with me. He essentially said the last time that the State Board of Education adopted math standards, that it adopted some of the most rigorous in the nation, or rigorous for Wyoming. And because of such rigor, there was little room to add anything. And so as a legislator, I thought, wouldn't it be helpful if we had the conversation of, if we want to add computer science, what does that mean for maybe taking back or like reducing some of the rigor of math? And so we kind of have a balance. But as we started having that conversation, it became really apparent that when we look at the content performance standards, they're written by subject area, not by grade level. So the purpose of this bill, Mr. Chairman, is to try and get a better handle of how these content and performance standards work together by grade levels rather than by subject. So I don't know if you're able to pull up that attachment. This is nothing fancy. This is a spreadsheet I put together years ago to try and get an understanding of what we ask for each grade. And so based on kind of how my kids' days go, you'll see, and I went through the rest of the statutes, in 21-9-101B, little Romanet 2, we say for grades 1 through 8, reading, writing, and math shall be emphasized. And speaking as a mom, I can tell you that my kids get daily instruction in math and reading and writing Monday through Friday in lower grades. There's also a requirement that school districts shall provide instruction in foreign language in K through 2 in accordance with standards promulgated by the board in accordance with 21-9-102G. This has been another contentious area. There have been efforts in the past to repeal this section entirely. And so I've looked at the content and performance standards for foreign language or world languages, and this is an old spreadsheet. I used it using some vocabulary that we've changed. I think we've changed that to now world languages. But when you look at the content and performance standards, they're really written as though you were providing instruction to a 7th or 8th grader or a high school student. For example, it talks about, the ability to write complex sentences or paragraphs in another language. And if you think about that, that's really not applicable to kindergartners. They don't write big sentences or paragraphs. And so the goal of this study would be to kind of synthesize all these requirements to some degree. You'll note that government and civics is a standalone item in the basket, but it doesn't have its own content and performance standards. That's actually covered in social studies, the social studies standards. So on the bottom, you'll see some of that explanation of these extra requirements. The fact that the US Constitution and Wyoming constitutions, even though they're in the basket, they're really part of the social studies topic. We've passed legislation saying school districts may provide child sex abuse prevention instructions. I'm unaware of any district that's offering that. I just thought I'd throw it in there since it was in the mix. You'll recall, we also years ago passed an act called the American Indian Education for All Act, which required the state board to revise social study and performance standards to make materials, reflect modern contributions of Native American people. So that's, yet another kind of requirement that we've added. And then one last thing that's kind of, you find in this section is about how every public school in Wyoming should be required to provide a fire drill once a month. We've talked in the past about maybe altering that language a little bit to not have it just be limited to fire drills, but maybe other safety practices, what would you do if you had an active shooter, those kind of things. But those efforts have been unsuccessful. So really, I think what the goal here, Mr. Chairman, I know there's another bill down the hall that would say, for the lower grades in particular, K through 3, how about we just pick 4 of these content and performance areas to focus on: reading, math, science, and one other. And I just think that's the wrong approach. I think kids want to have a diverse day. I think kids spend time in computer lab when they're in kindergarten. And so instead of, looking at these subjects in silos, I think, the goal should be to look for opportunities where maybe there's some redundancy, where maybe you can get a 2-for-1 lesson out of some instruction that covers both requirements for math or science or vice versa. And so that's the goal of the study, is to really look at this structure that we have in place and try and make better sense of it so that we're easing and making the day a little bit more manageable for teachers and for students. So with that, Mr. Chairman, just to walk through the bill, there are a lot of paragraphs in here, and I won't spend a lot of time. It's not a complicated bill, but the first page would talk about the duties of the state board. Or, excuse me, I might be looking. Oh, yes, this is the duties of the state board. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. It would say one of their duties is to publish uniform content and performance standards adopted in a manner that allows school districts to identify all the standards across all content areas by grade level. So that would be the new requirement for the State Board of Education. And then section 2 is the study part of it. This, I don't think, is an undertaking that can happen quickly. I think for it to be effective, it needs to involve multiple stakeholders. And so this would require the state superintendent to consult with the state board and local school districts to study the basket of goods and skills and promulgate them according to this new paragraph. And so, section 2 going on to throughout the rest of the bill, these are just some requirements of what would be included in that study. So I don't know, Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, if you want me to walk through all of those, or if you think the committee has a pretty good handle on it. But that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. As you see on page 5, the department had looked at what the fiscal impact for this would be, so it does include an appropriation of $72,000. I rarely and really dislike asking or introducing bills that require an appropriation, so I really stay away from that. But as I've thought about this for the last several years, Mr. Chairman, I do think this is an important undertaking that could really make a difference in improving our overall instruction for kids, hopefully easing the burden for teachers. And then I think it fits really nicely into the conversation we've had about the importance of early literacy and just maybe freeing up some more time to really allow teachers to focus on literacy in those early grades in particular. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Committee, any questions? Senator Brightman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Ellis. I agree, this bill is a good idea. We need to take a look at this. As a parent of kids in public schools, we've made it through elementary, now we're in the middle school. And during the elementary years, I did notice so much emphasis on ELA and math. Like, that's just pounded through. And social studies and science kind of gets pushed to the side. They'll do one semester or one quarter, you look at the report card and they didn't even teach social studies that quarter. Or same with science. There might be a blank spot on the report card. These standards, we're already covered in the first quarter. So they're not getting it every month, every day, whatever, like they are with ELA and math. And is that because of the testing we do on the YTOP? And it's like, we gotta get our ELA scores up, we gotta get our math scores up. So we just pound those two and everything else just kind of falls to the side. Am I reading that correctly? Is that why it is the way it is?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Brightman, good question. I don't know. I'm not a classroom teacher, so I don't know that I can answer that definitively, but definitely from the parent side, that's what I see. I remember when I was a kid, I used to love writing stories, and my mom recently passed and we were going through all of our old stuff and I found boxes and boxes of stories I used to write. And I think, look at my kids and they don't write anything. There's no creative outlet. So, I think it's just that concern as a parent that we are very focused on those scores, and I understand how we've gotten there. But I think the emphasis is a little too much.
let me weigh in on that one too. I think some of it is those skills in reading. The English language arts is the term, but reading is what you're really talking about. And math are so important in the elementary level because all the rest of education hangs on it, and you've got to learn those basics in order to really progress to the other topics successfully as the academics develop it. It seems to me, yes, we do focus on that in the testing and in how we look at it, but that's because they are fundamental to everything that comes after that. So I suspect that's why. And I can't. It seems to me the appropriate approach to take is what's going on there.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with that. I think, again, I come to this completely as a parent. I have 3 kids, and one of my children, I can see where there's been some learning loss in reading. And right now, she's a 4th grader, and a lot of the math problems, they aren't just, she does fine on 2 + 2 is 4, and just the straight up equations. But once you start phrasing things in the context of a word problem, Janie ran 1 3/4 miles, Johnny ran 2.5 miles. How many miles did they run together? When you start phrasing things and it requires more, literacy understanding, those are the problems she struggles on. So if we're able to break those down in simple math equations, she's fine, but it's getting there and it's decoding and it's literacy. So again, the goal of this is, how do you smooth that out a little bit better for teachers so that, again, it's not just, this is your math, this is your reading, because they all come together. And if we're really not providing those early foundational skills and literacy, it makes the rest of the experience, in my view, in other subjects increasingly difficult.
Under office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Ellis, I appreciate this legislation. We've talked a lot about these concepts, and I think it's important to find ways that we can bring the standards together. One of the other topics, though, that relates to this that I don't think is necessarily addressed by the bill, but certainly could be in terms of the study, is relates to joy of learning, mental health, workload for students, those types of issues. As we have more and more standards and more requirements and more academic rigor, those types of priorities end up getting pushed aside. And you have to have balance. And honestly, I think this is one of the challenges we have. We really do have rigorous standards, and we have exceptional teachers. We end up working our younger students hard enough that they get kind of burned out and lose the joy at some point. And I see those struggles with my kids. Is there a way that perhaps we could amend on committee of the whole? We don't need to do it right now, or maybe in second reading, to add some consideration for that. How many hours a week are students having to work to keep up with the current content standards? As well as something we haven't talked a lot about is maybe not all standards are equal, and maybe not all of the basket of goods and are equal in terms of their prioritization. And I don't think we've ever done that analysis. Would that be something that you'd be interested in maybe exploring through this legislation as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, absolutely. Right now we have physical education and health and safety as separate components in the content and performance standards. In my view, if you kind of combine those of just health, that could include, physical health as well as mental health. And I think we've talked, this is just a crazy idea, but, we've talked a lot in the legislature about the mental health needs, not just of our students, but our population. I think if we start looking at tools of providing basic mental health at early ages and throughout, maybe that serves our society better in general down the road, because I don't know that we'll ever be able to hire enough mental health professionals to actually meet the need that's out there, quite honestly. So I'd say that that would be a good thing. I welcome committee of the whole amendments, and this is a study bill. And one thing I did want to also mention in this is this notion of the skills. What is a skill versus what is a competency that we need to measure. And so one thing that we have listed in the basket is financial management, listed under computer, or excuse me, the Common Core of Skills. I talk to people that work in this industry, bankers who volunteer in Cheyenne that try and offer this kind of training. Even in Cheyenne, at Spotty, we have 3 high schools, and I think it's offered as an elective. I think the legislature's intent in passing that was at maybe making that a mandatory requirement that kids have basic financial management skills. So, you know, when we add something to the skills or the basket, I think this would be an opportunity for us to also clarify what our expectation is when we add things like that. Is this something we just kind of want to throw out there as an offering, or something that we want to be taken seriously and offered at all of our schools? So just a thought I didn't want to forget. That didn't really answer your question on the mental health piece, but.
I'm going to follow up on that one because Cinderavos has intrigued me. I've thought that one of the problems we've had with our standards is that we've got so many of them that essentially they've made everything a priority with the result that nothing is a priority. And how would you, the question I've got is, should we do something to this bill to try to deal with that and talk about standards not being equal or setting priorities among the standards? I don't have a good way to implement what Senator Rafis was talking about, but I think he's really onto something.
Mr. Chairman, I spoke with our superintendent about this bill to make sure that we had an understanding of what it was I want, because this is complicated. That big spreadsheet I gave you was kind of a mess. I think that as the task force and, you know, if we're able to pull together some stakeholders to study this, that can be an ongoing dialogue that we have, is how do you kind of prioritize that? And I didn't want to put it in this bill specifically. In my view, literacy is a really key component. As I mentioned, you know, my daughter's falling behind on the literacy pieces of her math problems. So, you know, if you wanted to add some language to that effect, but I also didn't want to tie the hands of this group to see if they could maybe get there on their own. But I think this does, for this bill to work and this task force to work, it will require some ongoing kind of conversations between legislators and the state superintendent as they work on this report.
Okay. Thank you very much. State Department, I'm going to call on the State Department first on this one.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Wanda Maloney. I am the Chief Policy Officer at the Department of Education. I wanted just to further bring to your attention to some of the things that are happening, and I would start with Section 2 of the bill on page 2, and just talk to you a little bit about the first part on beginning on line 11. Talks about a study of the Common Core of Skills and Knowledge Content Performance Standards. Moving into Romanet I, really looking at all of the skills and the requirements. How do they transfer in allowing a student to be ready, to have the skills that they're ready to be ready for college, to be in the workforce, to have technical skills, to also be intellectually and economic in society. I'd like to bring your attention to the work that the State Board has begun doing in Profile of a Graduate, which specifically talks about that. And what the State Board did is they went out to stakeholders, they talked to business leaders, they talked to educators, they talked to parents, they even went to students. The department had an opportunity to listen in to some of those comments. And what we heard is several themes came out. And one of them that really rose to the top was the fact that kids are getting skills, they're getting knowledge, but when they go out into the workforce, the ability to transfer that into a meaningful way is where they really struggle. And so the board started to look at what can we do in order to develop competencies or skills that would support them. And they came up with some common threads. What is it that students need to learn? How will that transfer into work? How can they contribute as a citizen? And then finally, thrive. You were talking earlier about kids having that balance, having those interpersonal skills, having that perseverance. And that really looks at the whole child. And so when the state board went out and heard many of these things, they also recognized that our students not only need to have the knowledge and skills, they need to be able to transfer those type of things into real world settings. And that takes more than just the education community. It takes parents, it takes the community to be invested in this work and to help provide and support opportunities for that. So I would just continue to say that that work is beginning. We've had an opportunity to listen to many districts. Some districts are already doing this work. They have capstone projects. They have interviews set up. They bring in the community to help engage their students into learning. So we have to recognize in some areas this is already happening, but the state board is well on their way to making this something that's a reality. I would go on further just to talk about Romanet II, beginning on number 7, page 3. And this is really looking at the consideration, the elimination, the addition of those knowledge and skills, even looking at targeting specific grade levels. And what I would say to that is that the department is very aware of the workload that teachers have, the number of standards, the number of responsibilities that they have every day in those schools. And what we would also say is that the department is working with the state board. The state board has adopted a resolution. And what that resolution says is that they resolve to reduce the standards by adopting performance standards as the state standards. And what that really means is that they're looking at specific content areas. They've started with math and with science. They brought together an audit team. This audit team has looked at the whole scope, kindergarten through 12, and they've identified what do they really believe kids need to know and be able to do, and what can they vitally ensure that kids learn in the time that they have available. There's so many instructional hours in a day. And so the department, along with the state board, is currently looking at that load. And what the state board will also do is to take that out, to bring that to each of the regions. Curriculum directors will have access to look at that. And I can tell you that they have made an incredible reduction at the beginning of this work. And so we also need to get input and feedback from teachers, from curriculum directors to make sure that it is the right standards that they have selected. The state board further then with the department will look at streamlining additional standards. So this won't just stop with the math and the science. They'll go and look at health and PE. They'll look at performing arts. They'll also look at physical education. So the same process that they've done to audit will continue into the other standards. So I would continue on then to say that this study we feel is very important. We feel like there's a need for it, and it's a perfect time to do that work. And so Romanet I and Romanet II, we believe as a department will take some considerable time. We want to look holistically at the breadth of standards, and we want to continue the work that has already started. So we would respectfully ask for, on page 3, beginning on line 14, to be able to delete lines 14, continuing on, or to the bottom of page 14 through 23. And then on page 4, we would ask to be able to delete 1 through 23. And it's not because we don't think these things are important. We do believe that these things will scaffold into the next steps. So for example, once we have standards in place, it's going to be important to look at the assessment, the YTOP assessment, to make sure that there's alignment. So although we think those things are important, we do believe that it's going to take considerable time to do the first Romanet and the second, and that these things will scaffold And the department, along with the state board, will continue to work at the relationship and look at all of the other areas it will impact, whether it's the YTOP, whether it's the assessment, whether it's accreditation, whether it's accountability. All of these things are connected and work together, and they will naturally be examined as we move through this.
Okay, let me stop here and just ask a technical question. On page 4, how far did you want to go deleting things?
We would respectfully, Mr. Chairman, ask to delete on page 4 from lines 1 to 23.
Oh, the whole page.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And then moving on to page 5. We would also respectfully ask that the date be changed on line 2 to no later than November 1 of 2023, that we would come together and report the findings and recommendations from the study. And again, that study would be from Romanet 1 and 2. And if that was made available to the Joint Education Committee, that still would be available during the budget session.
So on that point, I think, and I can't speak for Senator Ellis, but it's how I would have done it. With the August 1st deadline, you're going to have 2 committee meetings. So you're going to have a committee meeting to take a report, propose legislation, contemplate it a little bit at that meeting, and then potentially vet the legislation at the final meeting, which will be in November for the Education Committee. And the original Romanet 6 on page 4 kind of leads into that, which is the idea of proposing as part of the report legislation as opposed to just some recommendations. It seems that if we move the date to November 1st, I understand that allows for a more thorough reporting, but it would basically mean that we would have to wait a full year before passing any of the even low-hanging fruit recommendations that might be in the report. Would there be a way to maybe hybridize that and have a preliminary report August 1 and a final report? We've done that before, where we can actually then have the time to work legislation that might be some preliminary recommendations while still providing time for a more complete report at a later date. Would that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I think that makes complete sense, and I think that's doable.
Thanks.
Okay,
See what Dickie has to say here.
because that is important. I've had experience with the Health Committee. Set the deadline too quick, you don't get a thorough job done. You set it too late, you don't have time to develop legislation. There's been a setting of committee meeting times, but we might have to change those if this passed. That would be the other alternative. But a preliminary report and then a final one might work better. So that's really contingent on, does State Department think they could be ready to provide and it would really need to be early August reporting date.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to Senator, I totally understand the timing with the Joint Education Committees. What our concern is the appropriation. We don't have access to that, I believe, until the law becomes effective. And then we're gonna have to do a procurement to get a consultant to come in, and that's gonna take a couple months at a minimum. And so if we don't have the money available till July, I mean, maybe we start the procurement in like May or June, get somebody under contract, I don't know, in July at some time, and then we're already at August. So I just don't know, from a procurement perspective with a consultant, what we'd be able to produce by August.
Okay,
What if we make the appropriation effective immediately? I mean, we're in the budget cycle, so that's not a problem at all. And then,
section 4.
yeah, Is it effective immediately already?
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Okay.
this has an immediate effective date.
Does all of it? It looks like all of it does.
So
So BO.
Yeah, it is. The appropriation is and everything else is as well. Is that helpful?
Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator, I think, yes, if it gets signed and then that money's available, then we could go right into procurement and that would give us a couple more months.
my experience, and again, I'm thinking of the experience we had in the Health Committee, the state procurement system is very cumbersome. We several times would amend it, say you did not have to be bound by the state procurement system. Would that be useful, or is just the nature of the beast, it's going to take you a while?
Thank you for that. I think it probably just need to go through the process.
Senator Roth.
And we don't need to decide this now, certainly, but looking at some of the other projects we've done over the years, like the Wyoming Accountability and Education Act and others, having it be an ongoing process and doing a longer scale procurement was certainly useful. So start off with, again, the low-hanging fruit, try and get an early report. But even the idea that this would be finalized in December or anything like that doesn't necessarily seem like it's a desirable outcome. It seems like you might want to iterate through. And that also might address the concern with regard to stopping at Romanet 2, where Senator Ellis has, 4 more points to look into: the availability of an ongoing relationship, a contract, and then potentially funding it in the next legislative session to continue it, to do further investigations might be useful. Does that seem consistent with what you're interested in?
Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Rothfuss, yes, and I know the superintendent has discussed this proposed amendment that Chief Maloney mentioned with the sponsor.
Mr. Chairman, could I bring up one more item, and that is on page 5?
Certainly, and then we're going to come back, and so don't go away, Dickie. We may need you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 5, on line 15, 16, and 17, we would also request to delete that respectfully because we feel like it's dependent on what comes out of the study. So it would be hard to have an expectation that all of the graduation standards would be in place until we further had information regarding the study.
Okay. Committee, any further questions for the State Department? If not, I'm going to go back to Senator Ellis and ask what your opinion is of their suggestions for amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did discuss the proposed suggestion. I want to offer this to you. If I've learned anything in the years that I've been in the legislature, it's to trust the process. So I bring this to you. Feel free to take a look at the proposed amendment, see if it makes sense. I think that I have no ownership over this. I think this is a big idea. So if we need to take some things out to actually get more of a targeted response done, that would make sense. And as far as extending out the date, I would rather this be done right than fast. I chose in drafting this bill some dates to start the conversation, but that is the ultimate goal, is let's do this right and not hurry through it and just to get something done.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Public testimony. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, hi, my name is Nathan Tajeski. I'm the middle school principal in Cody, Wyoming. I'm in favor of this bill. I do think that as you look through, there are a number of redundancies across content standards. I do want to bring up, as this work happens, and I hope that the bill passes, I think this is a great idea, honestly. But to a point that you made earlier, there is a there is a focus on math and language arts. And I don't think it's just in elementary school. I think it's systemically, and it is important. They are exceedingly important. They're high success indicators. But at the same time, honestly, that's how we're evaluated. I mean, when you look at the evaluation model for schools, the test is a big portion of that. I've been very encouraged at the comments about teaching kids holistically. I mean, I think everybody in here is in favor of teaching the whole child. I think we need to kind of evaluate that way too, though. If we're talking about setting up the way that we teach to make sure everything is covered, but then we still hold so much weight specifically on 2 content areas, the focus is going to remain on those 2 content areas. So I would say as this work happens, if you would just keep in mind and consider there are more ways to evaluate pieces like culture and climate, technological implementation, even leadership and vision are all really important parts of any school or any district. I think those should be considered as well. Sorry, I have to follow my little note card. I've never done this before. With that, I yield my time for any questions.
Okay, question? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Chairman Scott and Senate Education Committee. My name is Brittany Montgomery. I am the 2022 Wyoming Teacher of the Year. I come here today in support of this. I have a lot to say, so I'm going to try and rein it in. I teach first grade. I've taught kindergarten and first grade, and I think something that I have noticed, this is my 14th year teaching, and what I've noticed is, again, we've kind of touched on it, our standards in elementary are kind of segregated into these components now, and we've compartmentalized, well, I teach reading during this block. I teach math during this block. I teach this during this block. And the benefit of being in an elementary setting is we can cross-curricularly connect anything. Senator Ellis mentions ELA. Stories, books, literature has the opportunity to connect everything. I'm going to share something that we've been working on in my first grade class. The Governor Gordon, I think it was a couple weeks ago, wrote a proclamation to invite your elected officials to school. And the last couple years I've written to elected officials and not gotten response. And so this year I thought, you know what? We've been working on letter writing, which again is not a standard in first grade, but essential. And so my students have been writing to their elected officials. And this lesson connects reading. We read the proclamation together. We've been reading stories about government, which also allows me to tie in social studies. They asked, what is an elected official? So we had to talk about it. We had to talk about who are these people and why do they matter to us? That allowed me to connect social and emotional learning. Who are these people? What are they doing for us? And my students are like, oh, they make decisions for our schools. And I said, yes, they absolutely do. And they're like, well, they should be here. They should be visiting us. They should know us. And I said, you're absolutely right. And so we worked on writing. Again, we're in first grade. We're working on letter formation as far as like how to print letters, how to scribe. Senator Ellis also mentioned kids don't creatively write. They're not writing. It's very difficult. Technology has taken over a bit of our children's lives. Again, it's a digital babysitter. It's convenient. It allows for compliance so we can do the things we want. However, their hands don't work the same anymore. Our primary kids, their fingers, they don't know how to hold a pencil. They don't. And so again, another thing I wanted to talk about is we do have a ton of standards, and we assume every child comes in having all the previous year's standards, and they don't. We don't have preschool. Therefore, our children are coming into kindergarten unprepared. And yet kindergarten has a set of standards that they are to teach. And what if they're not there? Well, throw them at them, like, good luck. And so I think this is absolutely necessary. I also want to note, everyone mentioned, it's going to take time. This concept of, again, looking at, instead of segregating them into sections, let's talk about how do we connect all of these things? Again, like, they had to write your addresses. That's math, that's numbers. We talked about where are these people in location to us. We did the distance, we measured. So again, we have this opportunity, but it's going to take us shifting our perspective on education and saying, again, we want these kids to be successful in life, right? Senator Beitman, you mentioned, is this because of the testing? Again, where does our funding come from? From our scores, right? It comes from how are they doing on an assessment, which is important. It's important that we are held to high standards, absolutely. However, it's not everything. And again, you know, just this one lesson, I was able to connect all of these things, but it's not technically something I'm supposed to do. Yet I was able to do all these things. Again, we've talked about, we have a mental health crisis, absolutely. And I see it every day. I have 20 students by myself, and they come from all different walks of life. I have many that have been abused. I have, you know, I have 3 students that have had multiple surgeries, and that's traumatic. And again, we're trying to get them all to work together, but when in life are they working collaboratively? At home when they're on their devices alone. And so we have to take that time to, again, teach them how to be collaborative, how to work together. Again, when do we do that? When we have 800 standards. So I appreciate this. I appreciate all the work that you're doing. And again, I think the time is essential because it's going to take a shift in perspective. It's going to feel strange because it's not what we've been doing. We have been focused on math and reading because we know that's important, but so is all these other things. And the other thing I wanted to say is how much I appreciate each and every one of you. Every night after school, after I tuck my own children in, I've been watching each and every session. I watched every meeting, and I appreciate the perspectives and I appreciate the passion that you are all putting into it. I think you are considering these kids, you're considering us, and I think everyone wants what's best. Unfortunately, sometimes icky and uncomfortable comes with that. And so I hope as a state we lean into this and help our kids, because it's too much, but it's possible. So with that, also have my card. I yield and stand for questions.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Montgomery. That was great.
Thank you.
You hit the nail on the head when you said that, you know, you cross the standards and maybe you're not allowed to. When I talk to my friends, my dear friends that are teachers, they just want to teach.
Yes.
They don't want to be teaching standard facilitators, because that's basically what their job title is now. They're not teachers anymore. They're not allowed to teach like you're teaching. And that's why you're Teacher of the Year, by the way. If you didn't have an administrator that was allowing you to do this, you wouldn't be sitting here right now as Teacher of the Year. I would venture to guess. You would just be another standards facilitator. And thank you for doing that. And I think that's something that's so important that we have to get back to teaching, because we're losing teachers. My district's losing a fantastic teacher this year because throwing in the towel. I can't teach anymore. I'm done. And that passion's gone. We've got to let you teach, but we also have to hit the mark, like you said. So it's a delicate balance, but just for you and all the other teachers that are dealing with this, know that you are being appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Who else wants? In the back, we're going to have to start being a little bit, come forward, hurried here. We're going to run out of time. And
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'll be brief. My name is Alexis Barney. I'm a fourth grade teacher in Ranchester, Wyoming. I am the 2021 Teacher of the Year for Wyoming and a member of Level Up. So thank you for welcoming us here today. We're so excited to be here. I wanted to provide some context and answer some of the initial questions, especially from Senator Beitman. So I wanted to talk about the necessity for foundational skills. There is an assessment that is given other than the YTOP. It's called the NAEP test, and it's a national indicator. I've done a lot of research on this recently, and I wanted to give some context for current data. We have 50% of students proficient in reading and science in fourth grade. Now, the concerning part of this is Wyoming is leading the nation in NAEP scores. As a fourth grade teacher, that is concerning to me that 50% of our students, half of our students, are proficient. So when we look at that in reading and ELA specifically, we as teachers are starting to see, oh, there is a strong need for those foundational skills, and there is a strong need to make sure that those students are ready to be critical thinkers. In order to get to the science and social studies content, they have to be able to make strong inferences. They have to be able to read it critically. In order to do that, they have to be able to read. And so I appreciate the work done around the state by WDE and the State Board of Education, offering reading professional development and the foundations of literacy, as well as with the State Board of Education. I wanted to go back to what Chief Maloney referred to. Within their work that they've been doing within the last few months, they've pulled together an audit team. I had the privilege of being a part of that audit team with a number of other teachers from around the state. There was a diverse representation of teachers K through 12, and we did some really great work narrowing down math and science standards, not getting rid of content, but narrowing down what is to be assessed. And that is helpful for teachers in looking at those priorities. And so I wanted to bring that to the table in valuing the State Board of Education's work, in using the expertise from teachers around the state and other stakeholders, because we know that teachers are experts in their field. And so I wanted to bring that to the table and encourage funding for this work to continue with this bill, because when we encourage that funding, we can continue to encourage that strong teacher voice and hopefully raise the data and raise the bar for Wyoming education even further. So with that, I yield and stand for any questions. Thank you.
Ms. Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and just a question and a comment, but I really am thankful that you brought up that teachers are experts in their fields, because to me, seeing you and the parents and the collaboration there is where we find a lot of the answers. So thank you for your work and for commenting on this and letting us know we're on the right track.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, I completely agree, and that's why I think this work is critical to continue that collaboration with everybody in the community.
Okay, thank you. Bill, do you want to say a few words? Be brief.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Bill Winnie, Sublette County. You all had a teacher in one of your interim sessions that made the comment to you that they just wanted to be respected and made the newspaper. And I've seen over the years you do studies. I remarked before the Jonah building that you were on the treadmill with studies. I think the fundamental issue you deal with is, are teachers professionals? I had a chairman of a board of trustees in one district remark to me down in the Jonah building in the passageway. I had made a comment about teachers being professionals, and this chairman said, they're not professionals. They're just teachers. I about bounced my jaw off the floor when I heard that. I've observed my wife teach in many, many places over my 30 years on active duty. I think one of the things you have is the more studies, the more money you put into studies, the more money you put into superintendents or principals and other administrators, the more blue collar you make the front of the classroom. And the more blue collar you make the front of the classroom, and this kind of links back, I think, a little bit to Senator Beitman's comment, the more you need the studies or standards or whatever. And while I would support doing the study, I would offer you might want to think about changing its focus. Subject to your questions, thank you.
We're running out of time. Teskey? Very brief, okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, several years back, I was appointed to a one-year study on the Accountability Task Force. The reality of that one-year study was I served on that task force for 7 years. So I just encourage that we do this right. And I'm not sure actually even November is really going to be adequate time. I certainly understand Profile of a Graduate has been going on for some time. My district has participated in it a couple of different times through this process, but don't rush it, do it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, committee, we've run out of time, basically. What I'm going to do is lay this bill back to very first thing Friday. I want the committee members to discuss with the sponsor the proposed WD amendments. We'll see if we can reach a consensus on that. We'll work the bill quickly on Friday morning. Friday morning is mostly going to be taken up with charter schools. And I expect to have extensive testimony on that Friday morning, the big charter school bill. So with that, we're adjourned, but I do want to get this bill out of here Friday morning because it has to go to appropriations as well. So if the sponsor could work with the members of the committee and we'll try to get a consensus on what to do. Okay.